Hi. The title should normally say how to build a backend, and I want to share what I found or learned in the last year, basically, and what I would like, what would have been good if I would have known it earlier. Yeah. So, how to build a backend? So, a backend basically is this whole thing here, plus a database. And okay, so I will explain something that wasn't clear to me, and maybe it's not clear to you, and maybe it will help. So your client is basically whatever you have, a mobile client or a web application or whatever, some front end you are going to use. You see it in the browser or whatever. And then you want to get some data. And what do? You send an HTTP request to some endpoint. And this endpoint, for example, is, I don't know, we're going to make an example now while we're talking about this. Let's say the endpoint is, so this is our example. The endpoint is slash product. So, and slash product, we make a get request here. So we make a get request here. Oh yeah, I can take another color, get. So what we want to retrieve with this request is probably, and we should say products, we want to get all products. Okay, so this is our endpoint. Then what we do is something it's called layered architecture. So what you basically do is you divide your backend into handlers, services, DAOs, and DTOs. And if you're like me, you have heard this and you have never understood what it really does. And that's why this video exists. So handler. So the handler basically then checks, okay, is this request valid? So this is the first step. So when going over the endpoint and to the handler, then we make a check. So do we have are we authenticated to do that, or that should maybe, or do you have the right parameters and stuff like that? The details are not important. You can ask ChatGPT about the details. This is just for understanding the concept. Okay, we have a handler. We make a lot of checks. So we go to, then we make checks, whatever that is. And then we have the next thing in the chain, and where we actually do something is the service. And the service is basically doing the whole computation. So everything that's interesting and has some logic is basically in the service. So let's say for products, the service in this case will be pretty easy. So in terms of products, the service would probably prepare some inputs for what comes afterwards. But in this case, we just say, okay, it transfers the request, and that's everything we do for the service now. And where do we transfer the request? We transfer to the DAO. And the DAO, what is a DAO? DAO does means data access object, and or database access object, I don't know, but it's basically the encapsulation around your database queries. So here you, for example, have your SQL or your whatever your builders, your SQL builders, and if you want to have an ORM, you can have an ORM. So if you don't know what it is, it doesn't matter. Here is the database query happening, and so the service transfers the request to the DAO, which actually requests data from the database. So I will have to start a new line here now, I think. Or maybe I can take this. Can I take this? Make this smaller. Yes. And then, okay. And then we can say here, request data from DB. Okay. So then we get this, and now we return stuff. So now the DAO has gotten some data, and let's say this is the data. Then we return stuff. So we basically just return what we get from the database here. So only the model, the bare model, basically. So what stands in the database? So in our case, for example, we have an ID on the product, and we have a name and a price. And we return that. And in the service, again, in this case, we don't do much. We just transfer the request back again to the handler. And now on the way back, the handler builds the response. And so we don't have to do that manually all the time. We use something, and this is the last element in the chain, which is important. It is the DTO, and the DTO is the data transfer object, and the data transfer object is mainly just there to say, okay, you have a constructor, and everything you get from the database, so this thing, you shove into the constructor, and then you have an object you can work with. And you have an object you can work with, and an object your client also knows what to aligns with. So your client is expecting the DTO. So the client is expecting that the data you return for a product looks like the DTO looks. Yeah. So basically building the response is converting and the next color, converting this thing into DTO. Yeah, that's that. And lastly, the last step is then what we do basically here. Or before we return, we convert this to JSON and return everything to the client. Yeah. And if that was unclear, then maybe just leave me some comments down below. I'm happy to go over this in more detail and show some code, or for example, or stuff like that. But I think this would already have been very valuable for me, because this logic chain was not clear to me when I started building a backend. Yeah. I hope you found this valuable, and see you in the next one.